Egyptian newsreel showing mass hysteria, Arab style. An orgy of hatred directed against the tiny state of Israel. Soviet arms and missiles, gifts to the Egyptian people from their Russian allies, expensive gifts. Rigorous training by Egyptian elite troops just before the six-day Arab-Israeli War of 1967. A better performance for the camera than later given on the battlefield. Prior to the war, the chief of the Palestine Liberation Forces was asked about possible Israeli refugees. He replied, "No problem, for there won't be any Jews left." An earlier time, another country, but with some striking similarities. The ominous and mercurial rise of the German National Socialist movement in the early 30s. The demagogic Hitler stirred the masses with a scapegoat technique as old as recorded history to excuse past defeats and explain national difficulties. Hitler was not taken seriously in the beginning. His young propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, considered a comic figure. The barbaric act of burning books made the entire civilized world cringe, but did not move them to counteraction. Hitler, the first dictator to recognize the importance of mass media. The forged Protocols of Zion, an anti-Semitic tract, was circulated by the Nazis, followed by laws forbidding Jews to engage in certain professions, only the beginning of a long list of acts to humiliate and destroy the German Jewish citizen. Accusations on the one hand of capitalist backing, and on the other hand of communist conspiracy, were reiterated by the Hitler-Goebbels crew. Shirted stormtroopers forced their way into the homes of political opponents at night, dragging them into the streets, and then paraded them for public ridicule. A tyrant of another era at the turn of the century, Tsar Nicholas signs into law acts which encourage the population to rise up against their Jewish neighbors in the age-old scapegoat aim. Bloodletting, which was a recurrent event endured by the Jews. The threat of repeated attacks and even death, Jewish life in Eastern Europe continued and even prospered. The city of Vilna, considered the Jerusalem of Europe in the early part of the century, as depicted in a photoplay of that era, shows the kind of life the people led. They lived very much as they had in urban communities for hundreds of years, surrounded by their own people and institutions. The rabbi, which means teacher, was the head of the community. He had his followers, ruled on matters of law, and gave advice to those who sought it. To be honored by sitting at the rabbi's table was considered great status. The cheder, or school, and house of learning was very important. For whoever had knowledge was considered above those who might possess only wealth. The signing of a marriage contract between the parents of the prospective bride and groom was the culmination of arrangements made between the families, considered the best insurance for a happy life. Weddings were particularly festive occasions. Life, even in a ghetto, was meant to be enjoyed. Meanwhile, thousands of miles removed, a vast majority of Jews lived for centuries among the Arabs, as in Aden. Although forced to live in a ghetto, they were allowed their synagogues and religious practices. Their manner of praying was in many ways strange to their Eastern European brethren. The study of the Bible was central to their lives. Dance has an international language, and Yemenite dancing has a particular flavor of great joy and movement. Across the wastelands of the Arabian desert lay the land of the Bible, the ancient Jewish homeland eroded and neglected for hundreds of years under the harsh despotic rule of the Turks. A far cry from the proverbial land of milk and honey. Nevertheless, in the mind, heart, and prayers of every Jew, throughout their 2,000 years in exile, remained the messianic dream of return. Within this area, civilizations flourished and then crumbled to dust. Of all the ancient peoples, only the Jews managed to survive. In 1897, Theodor Herzl, a Jewish political thinker, put forth the idea of a modern Jewish state in the biblical land of Palestine. Young intellectuals of Russia followed Herzl's dream of return. An all-Jewish city, Tel Aviv, was founded on the sand dunes in 1909. Ben-Gurion, the young man with clenched fist, photographed with a group of early workers, and later as a member of the Jewish Legion in the First World War. This war, with its mobilization of millions of soldiers of many nations, brought with it misery and suffering. Europe in ruins. Masses of soldiers and civilians going home. The Jews, like everyone else, left young men lying in military cemeteries on alien soil. After the war, Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, issued a statement that His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The country was then under British control. Later, the League of Nations awarded a mandate to the British. In Jerusalem, the ancient Wailing Wall, part of the last Jewish temple, so holy to Jews the world over. But at the same time, work was replacing prayers for many, hard work to redeem the land, physical labor, in place of being merchants and bankers. The planting of trees, the tilling of the soil, the pride in watching things grow, rebuilding Israel from the land up by the sweat of the brow and the love of labor. The Tower of David and the rest of the old city of Jerusalem, favorite sites of visitors from all over the world, both those in Western dress and those wearing the Muslim fez of the Turks. Jews lived side by side with their Arab neighbors. Visitors mingled with the local inhabitants who used the shade to advantage in the hot streets. The old continued to pray at the Wailing Wall, a place where the stones speak of 2,000 years of history. And the young continued also to build new Jerusalem. Street scenes of those days revealed public buildings designed with an Eastern flavor, while automobiles coexisted with horse-drawn carts and carriages. High in the north, the old city of Safed, where Jews had lived for centuries. The narrow streets where many a scholar and mystic had walked and lived. A quaint town which retains its charm and uniqueness even today. Jewish citizens celebrating at the tomb of a beloved rabbi. The settlement of Tel Aviv in part of the town, a construction boom to house the slowly increasing population, the beginnings of a building industry, very primitive methods by modern standards, but the way to get the job done, no matter how long it took. The bad-tempered camel, disagreeable and awkward, but a very useful beast. Young pioneers determined to build a new idea in an old country. Elsewhere, malaria-infected swamps had to be cleared. Irrigation trenches were dug so that the swamp waters could be drained off for agriculture. Miles of pipe were laid to channel that water to stretches of heretofore waste areas. Life-giving water to make barren lands bloom in a country that to this day remains one-half desert. The eternal search for and utilization of water. The key in making the land productive and new settlement possible. The typical story of the laying out of one such communal settlement in the 30s began with the group moving out from their tents in an established community. The British curtailed the issuance of building permits, but under Turkish law, if the roof of a dwelling was up one morning, it could not be taken down. They loaded on trucks early in the morning with all the materials needed to erect their own settlement. Barbed wire was brought along as an important supply for defense because of the threat of roving Arab bandits. Rifles went with the workers into the field, reminiscent of early American frontier settlements. The most important structure, the watchtower, was the first to go up. Prefabricated wall sections went up, and later, roofing for the people who would soon live there, and a last touch, electrical connections. Beit Yosef, the house of Joseph. Young pioneers beginning their own community to raise families during what they hoped would be a peaceful, prosperous existence. The local equivalent of the dining room bell and the communal meal. An old-fashioned plow, accomplishing its purpose while youth fashioned new implements. Agricultural skills learned that had not been generally known or used in the old world. And the duties of the day always including soldiering. Even the young members were called upon for guard duty. These boys carry rifles almost as big as themselves. Work in the fields, a continuous cycle of harvesting, planting, cultivation, and care. During this period, civil disorders were rampant throughout Palestine because of growing unrest led by Arab extremists. While the British police looked on, the Arabs paraded in protest against the Jews for buying land and building settlements. Then the aftermath of riots, Jewish homes in the quarter destroyed, shops looted, and blood shed. Additional police were called in to reestablish order. The local fire department went to the rescue, but often too late. The British resident High Commissioner made a statement.
And industry. During the past 4 weeks, the law-abiding citizens of this country, under deep provocation, have shown a restraint which is highly appreciated by me. This spirit of restraint is admirable in itself and is most helpful to government. I again assure you that no strike and no acts of violence will cause government to deflect one jot from its determination to discharge in full its obligations under the mandate.
Because of Arab acts of terror, the roads of Palestine became unsafe without a convoy. British soldiers provided protection. Armored cars of the police led the way as Jewish settlement police tried to maintain order during recurrent periods of friction. The feudal Arab landlords saw in the Jewish way of life a threat to the status quo. Later, at the funeral of those killed during the disturbances, the martyrs were mourned. The streets of Tel Aviv packed with onlookers. An early beginning of the Jewish self-defense organization. The British, in keeping with their policy of political equilibrium, allowed a group of Jews to enlist in the Palestine police force. Many officers of the Israeli army received their first military instruction in this manner as teenagers. Training of prime importance in keeping down the death toll from Arab bandits. And so the Jews strengthened themselves. In every settlement, in every outlying sector, they learned the skills of warfare after 2,000 years. For not since the freedom fighters of Masada had opposed the Romans had the Jews as a group studied the art of war. In isolated watchtowers, young men kept the peace. Guards also patrolled the orchards, on the alert for marauders. The British trained the Arabs, too. After the riots in Jaffa, the Jews established their own port to the north in Tel Aviv. At first, they brought in material by small boat from ships anchored in the bay. Citrus, then as now, was a major export item. Soon the port took shape as the pier extended ever deeper out into the bay. And then, at the opening of the new port, a dance enjoyed by the Jewish stevedores. a group of dignitaries at a dedication ceremony in the 30s. Golda Meir, schoolteacher turned Zionist diplomat. Meir Dizengoff, mayor of Tel Aviv. Ben-Gurion. Moshe Sharet. And Chaim Weizmann, who was destined to become Israel's first president. The re-emerging Jewish state needed its own culture and language, one which could unite Jews from east and west. Hebrew was revived and adapted to modern usage. The ancient letters appeared in the press, periodicals, and daily lives of those who lived in Palestine, a monumental accomplishment initiated by Eliezer ben Yehuda, considered the father of modern Hebrew. The country was making progress. Automobiles appeared on the newly built roads, and more tree-lined avenues were evident. Many Jewish philanthropists, like Baron Edmund Rothschild, gave large sums of money. With the influx of capital, the economy showed signs of activity. Scenes photographed in the 1930s at the annual Purim celebration. Retelling the story of Jewish Queen Esther's triumph over the would-be dictatorship of Haman in Persia centuries before, had special significance. It was a victory over an attempt to destroy the Jews. The people viewing the parade would live through a similar crisis in the not-too-distant future. But here, warriors held Tory spears, and the pyramids were made of cardboard. The dream of the promised land was being fulfilled. Ezekiel's prophecy of the valley of the dry bones coming to life. The Jewish people rising in the wilderness, reborn, plowing and digging into the neglected and eroded soil of their ancient homeland. With the aid of irrigation projects making the sparse rocky land verdant, seeing the grain rise toward the sun-filled sky, the olive trees in their gnarled majesty, and the milk herds, life-giving water for parched earth in order to bring forth fruit. The orchards yielded their bounty, old and young alike, harvesting the crops. Oranges selected, wrapped, placed in boxes, all by hand, for export. As agricultural export increased, industry prospered. Mass machinery placed in airy factories with the people acquiring the necessary skills to operate it. The Arabs lived their simple life, unchanged for generations. But their leaders viewed with great alarm the growing Zionist social progress and increased productivity, which contrasted with their own feudal system. And always, the new generation of Jews being raised in a much different way, with new goals, and living the outdoor life. Unfortunately, There were continual acts of terror by their Arab neighbors that shook the lives of the citizens. The elements bore witness to both times of turmoil and times of peace. Jewish fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, a place where Peter the fisherman was said to have worked. And everywhere, great beauty, which enables one to understand how the ancients so loved the area and spent much time contemplating the stars and nature. There is a peace and tranquility to the lay of the land, particularly enjoyable on a boat ride. Soon the events in Europe would change the lives of these people and many others. As storm clouds gathered over Europe, now Hitler, very much feared by his opponents, invaded his neighbors with ease, causing destruction and perpetrating upon the Jews the greatest catastrophe of their already bloody history. Rounded up, herded into trucks like cattle, bound for the gas chambers. Ghetto areas were closed off and set to the torch. The lament of the ghetto dwellers was heard around the globe, but little assistance was forthcoming. There were incidents of resistance, but in general, the people were deprived of any avenue of escape. Everyone clinging to the desperate hope that somehow he and his family might survive. In each country they conquered, the Nazis were methodical in seeking out Jews. A few managed to escape by chance or through the compassion of their Christian friends. But most, such as these children, together with their friends, ended their lives in the concentration camps. The Germans used lethal gas, and the world learned a new word: genocide. Defeat of totalitarianism by the victorious Allied armies, the shadow of Hitler lingered over the total destruction which he had brought to his own and other countries. The contribution of the master race to civilization. In the capitals of the world, a great celebration, jubilation coupled with the hope that the end of the war would bring a lasting peace. Fathers returned to children. Husbands to wives. Mothers, sisters, and brothers were united again. But for so many, there was no return, for they had long since perished in the camps, or in the wreckage of the Warsaw Ghetto, of which almost nothing remained, except 2 square miles of rubble where a thriving Jewish community had once flourished. The destruction staggered the imagination. The horrible secrets of the camps only fully coming to light as the Allied soldiers entered. Then they understood the enormity of the crime against humanity. The pitiful human beings who were freed were taken gently out of the camp by their liberators. Only youth could manage a brave smile. The masses of stateless persons, including tens of thousands of Jewish survivors, were helped by various social service organizations to try to reshape their broken lives. First, transport back to their home, if it still stood, and to loved ones, if they by chance still lived. Many, however, could not bear to return to places where loved ones had died violently.